Okay. Um, are we live? Um,
Yeah.
just give me a second. Okay. Um, sound check for LinkedIn and YouTube. Mhm. Okay, nice. We have people who's joined us live. That's nice.
Seem surprised as I am.
I mean that's really nice. So, okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday evening for this fun live chat show, SciComm Souls, that showcases the unique journeys of science communicators. I am Suchita Champa, the founder of SciRio, and with me is Shweta Hegde, a student at the Regional Institute of Education, Mysore, who's co-hosting the show with me. For anyone new to SciRio, here's a brief introduction. SciRio is an independent enterprise building an ecosystem for capacity building and opportunity exploration for science communicators. And SciComm Souls is an essential part of SciRio because it underscores that science communication and communicators have different backgrounds, formats, and contexts, and that you do not have to follow a defined path to become a science communicator. And today, this is our seventh episode on SciComm Souls, streaming live on LinkedIn and YouTube. Don't worry if you have missed the previous episodes. You can find them all on our YouTube channel, whose link is in the chat section. You can find it here. And do check them out. And if you found them useful, do share them with your friends and colleagues. So let's get started. Today we have Devayani Khare, who has yet another exciting trajectory to becoming a science communicator and consultant. Thank you for joining us today, Devayani. I'll let Shweta introduce her briefly, and then we can get started. Go ahead,
Perfect.
Shweta.
Thanks, Suchita, and welcome everybody. To formally introduce Devayani, she is a communication consultant with a keen interest in science and geoscience communication. She previously worked as a science communicator and outreach manager at NCBS Bangalore, and now she writes and edits geoscience summaries on recent research papers at Geobites. She also runs a newsletter called Geosophy, which is her passion project. We will talk more about it later. She's also a traveler, storyteller. She's passionate about landscape, has love for maps, and is a dormant geomorphologist. So welcome, Devayani.
Thank you so much, Shweta. That was quite an overview. So I don't think there's much left for me. But I think something that I put out as a call for this particular talk, and I think that's what I would like this particular talk to be about, that I think when we all started out in college, we thought that we would have a very linear career path. I know that I was a very lucid 16-year-old. I knew exactly where I was headed. I wanted to study. I wanted to get into research. Some point in time, I had a change of heart. Psychology didn't seem to be my thing. And that particular year, we had a phenomenal curriculum that spoke about geomorphology. So the specialization that I have in geosciences is the evolution of landscapes. And geomorphology is basically looking at what landscapes were like before, what were the processes that shaped them, and what are the processes that are going to continue to shape them in the future. And somehow that topic just blew me away. It was talking not just about fast processes like earthquakes, volcanoes, and flash floods, but also about slower, inexorable processes like rivers and glaciers and wind. And I think that the thought that you could read the past of a landscape into just what the rocks kind of said, or what the rivers have left behind, or what's there today, and then you could kind of construe a past of almost 10,000 years, a million years, a billion years even, was just so phenomenal, because we live on such short time scales in a way. And I think that's pretty much what began my journey into geoscience. But I think, like a lot of us who got out of college, maybe ready to take on the world and ready to, I don't know, change the world even, was stuck having studied something that nobody really understood the practical implications of. And I got out with masters in geomorphology and ecology, and people are like, but you seem so confused. One side there's geography, one side there's environment, and there is no connect, and people didn't know what it is that I could do. I had a million different ideas, but none of them actually had practical value, not at the time. And that's how I think I kind of migrated. I moved into ecology in a way. My first few work stints were on biodiversity projects. And little by little, as I moved from biodiversity to some conservation projects to coastal development and things like that, it seemed that what was key was science, was communication. And though I came from a background, I studied arts for 5 years after 10th standard, I suddenly found myself having studied a lot of science, being able to be, let's say, that dummy in the middle, right? Like I don't know everything, but I don't not know everything. And then being able to translate that science for broader audiences, because I think over the years, scientists had gotten more and more technical with how they were communicating what they had done. They were doing phenomenal work. Biodiversity is fascinating, as is geosciences, but they had gotten so technical about it that they were unable to appeal to broad or general audiences. And I always felt geography was a phenomenal subject. I always met people who said, oh, so boring. You specialized in geography? Why? And I'm like, why not? And that's when I started realizing that maybe there's that, I need to bring people into that enthusiasm, like it has to be contagious because the rocks have stories to tell, rivers have stories to tell. And I had this phenomenal teacher in masters who used to talk about these things like they were alive. She would talk about a river as a she does this and she carves her way through a landscape. And that just really painted these vivid pictures and brought everything to life. And I think that's what landscapes are about. Landscapes have memory, I feel. And I'm not being religious or metaphysical here, but they have so much to tell. You have to just know how to kind of unlock that. And that, I think, is what I'm hoping to kind of do. So I moved from studying geosciences, not working in the field at all for a very long period of time, moving from sciences, from ecology, conservation, biological sciences. And then it just so happened that I started distilling content on geoscience again. And here I am today. I think it's carving a niche slowly but surely, but it's so nice to kind of get back into my field and still juggle a bit of both, because I guess that's survival as a SciCommer. So that's all I can add about me, please.
Yeah. Every conversation we have, I can see that passion you have, and also, the best of the both worlds that you bring from art and also communicating science through it, and the way you picturize or paint that entire idea of how beautiful geosciences is, and people are missing out a lot on that, right? So
I need to have my nerd mode on now, so it's like, yeah.
Yes. So, you've transitioned, different roles. Like, in the beginning, you've done a lot of roles as a project manager, and now you're a communication consultant, right? So, can you talk a little bit about what it means to be a communications consultant?
So what I can say is that though there were very different roles through all of this, I think at the heart of a lot of what we do, it's communication. Whether you're communicating to somebody within your own team, for instance, you have a wild idea, you want everyone to kind of execute it. There's diplomacy in it, and there is communication. At another level, no matter what kind of work that you're doing, I think communication is at the heart of it, whether you're on the forefront of it with social media or communicating to your client or roping in other business. I think communication, there's no getting away from it. In science, more so, as I said, that transition has been more and more towards using language that has been opaque, more technical, making sure that you're talking only to your tribe, the biologists, the chemists, the physicists, right? So science has become a language that has become very niche, has become very elite. And as a communications consultant, what I think my role largely is bridging those gaps, because I feel no audience is really outside the purview of any topic, and science more so, because science is at the heart of everything that we do. And just because we have disconnected the relevance of what it is in our day-to-day lives, because people are talking technical and they say, hey, this is the thing. And I also understand not all science is going to be revolutionary. Not everybody is going to find, let's say, like the cure for cancer or malaria, for instance, right? But does it then mean that science itself is not relevant to broad audiences? No. Remember, science is an iterative process. And I think as a communications consultant, what my greatest challenge is to convey that even if it's just a drop in the ocean, even if it's a milestone that we're kind of forging, even if this particular development doesn't really seem very revolutionary or isn't really changing the trend for now, it's that little iteration of knowledge that eventually could build into something bigger. So as a communications consultant right now, I am juggling projects that have to do with science still, because life sciences, because that is what I have a lot of experience with. Geosciences, because that's still my passion and I'm still trying to kind of find a niche in it. And then just taking on communication as a broad strategy, because all your marketing efforts will kind of boil down to what you're communicating. And that is a challenge I really enjoy.
Oh, I'm so glad you've said that. And I really hope, anyone working with any science communicator sort of understands that, because that's very important, right? So, I mean, going back to your career path, right? So you've had a very interesting turn of events. Like you've had a degree in art, in geography, right? So, and then moving on to project management into communications, and then into science communication, right? So how challenging has that been? Or was it just like a flow, or did it just like flow for you?
I don't know about a flow, but I think what I've always enjoyed has been the challenge of learning something new, of never stagnating. And I think science of all fields really offers that, because there's so many new developments happening all the time. It has been a bit of a challenge to kind of
Can you folks hear
change
me?
these projects.
I'm sorry, my internet's
So,
choppy this evening.
um, to kind of learn new concepts as you go along, because at one end I was working on a project to do with biodiversity in the Western Ghats. That's how I kind of started out. And at the time I had to communicate with 40 different projects that were dealing with everything to do with botany and biodiversity and something in the middle. I was going out there in the field working with everybody from school children to college people to researchers to scientists, PhD students, trying to talk to them about how citizen science information can be gathered and collated, and we can actually make sense and value of it by pinning down geographical locations of certain things. So at every step, I think, yes, it has been a challenge to keep changing the little toolkit that I kind of have, because then after that, I got into coastal development, where I was writing up a paper about industries and how they've expanded along the coast despite certain regulations in place. And what is okay for development to kind of embrace, and what are certain industries that are always going to be detrimental to the environment. So I was rationalizing that particular trend for industry. And constantly learning and constantly challenging myself with those concepts, and then coming to terms with what is the latest in that particular field. And then finally being at the helm of a place like NCBS, because it wasn't just NCBS and its 30 odd labs. There was another InSTEM institute with 15 labs or more, I think, in fact. And you're suddenly coming to terms with everything from bacteria to ecosystems, and like, wow, okay, where are we going with this? And then you have school children and college children coming onto campus, and you needing to provide them with a broad overview of everything that campus kind of does. So I think it has been a challenge, but it has been really fun, because I love to see the range that science kind of offers. And I feel at a school level, we broke up those sciences into these pure fields of physics, chemistry, and biology. And what's beautiful about being a science communicator is realizing that those lines are so blurred and then being able to convey that so that there's something in it for everybody. It doesn't matter if you don't really understand physics, for instance, but maybe I can draw you into physics through geography. Or if you don't really like botany, for instance, I remember doing a trail through like a university campus once in college. It was lots of fun. We just got recruited and we were showing these science students who were physics, chem, and mathematics graduates. And we were taking them on trails to do with botany. And they're like, yeah, we had these experts who came and told us botanical names of all these trees and just whizzed over our head and we don't know what they were saying. And what we were able to show them is botany through the lens of math, botany through the lens of physics, botany through the lens of geography. Why are certain trees found where they are? Why are beehives hexagonal, for instance? Why are certain trees growing towards a particular direction? Are they going for the light? Are they going for the water? Are they going? So that kind of thing. So we were, and it was just so much fun because I think that's what science kind of does. It has this lovely way of integrating all these fields and telling us chem, physics, bio wasn't as hard. Cold cut, we thought it was. So
Awesome. That's awesome. Right. So, I mean, you've just given us like an overview of what all you've experienced, right? So, with all of these options explored, I mean, do you think you have arrived, or are you willing to transition further and explore other opportunities?
we've never arrived. We're not likely to arrive anytime soon.
You said that.
No, I think, as I said, part of the challenge, part of the journey and the fun of it has been learning something new all the time. Right now, I'm happy enough because I am just stepping back into my field after so long. And it's so refreshing. And so much has changed, right? Because 10 years you haven't followed geosciences, man, I know it sounds like we talk only in geological timescales, and mostly changes happen 10,000 years on. But the field has changed, and there are so many new fields that have emerged just in the geosciences, let alone the other sciences. So, no, I do know that another transition could be on the horizon. And as science communicators, again, I think we also know that our roles are in very many different categories, if we can call it that. We could be teachers, we could be communication consultants, for instance, we could be writing content, we could be doing social media. There are so many platforms, there are so many channels out there. And I think, sure, there are more transitions waiting and hopefully more learning because I would just never want to stagnate.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that because I really wanted this coming from one of our guests, and if not all our guests, because this is something we really want people to think about and keep in mind when you're looking at opportunities and you're growing. Right. So, and also coming to the fact that you are a communications consultant in the geosciences space, right? So, most of our previous guests, if not all of them, have a background in life sciences. Can you spend some time talking about how the science communication space looks like for geology? I mean, you can discuss in India and outside of India as well.
So, to be very honest, this field is changing, I think, now. And I will be completely honest and say that, yes, I do feel that it's because the biological sciences and ecology conservation, so I think that falls completely under life sciences, has evolved to that degree. And there are so many new science communicators coming up. There are journalists who I kind of see writing some very interesting stuff that I feel the next big leap that needs to happen needs to be from the field of geoscience. But having said that, there's a long way to go. The opportunities are not very many. In fact, it has been a struggle to kind of find something. So at an international level, yes, there are some very interesting opportunities that are coming up. But let's be honest, as Indians, it's always difficult to break into that. Sorry. So it's a little difficult to break into those opportunities, but if you are so inclined, starting out small, starting out by writing something. Like what I do with Geobites right now is I distill recent scientific publications. This is something I do for free because it teaches me as much as I'm adding to the blog, for instance. And what happens is we have like a peer-reviewed setup within our little community. So somebody else is kind of giving me inputs on that. I write up a short summary of around 500 words, a little more usually. It's so difficult to distill something. And that's pretty much happening on like a regular basis. So that the opportunities can start really small. Um, and in the geosciences in India, on the other hand, I think things will pick up now because geoscience institutes, everything from geophysics to astronomy, are now kind of getting with that trend. And I'm pretty sure they are going to follow where the life sciences have established themselves. So I do feel it's going to be a developing field. The changes will come a little slowly, but they're going to be here. So I guess we need more geoscience communicators out there to kind of jump in because this is going to expand and it's going to shake the foundations. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. You don't have to apologize.
For terrible puns, I don't have to apologize for terrible puns. Good.
No, that's not. So, do you think like Geobites has been the place where you've sort of found your tribe, or do you also are you also part of like other communities where you share interests in science communication in geosciences?
So for now, yes, definitely. I think Geobites gave me a lot of confidence because, as I said, it was almost a decade since I had finished my master's and my dissertation, that I was kind of getting back into geoscience, though I might have touched upon it very vaguely through biodiversity. So yes, it definitely gave me the confidence to say, hey, there's all of this change that's happened in geoscience, but I still kind of get it. And I still hope to be able to convey this to kind of broader audiences. The initial articles that I put out, and I still continue to do so, I am writing largely and only in the context of India with some broad mentions of Asia. And it's very heartening to see how much audience there was for that, and that I think is really what kind of keeps you going. So yes, it's my tribe in that they were able to kind of push that through and say, hey, wow, we didn't know this is all happening in India. But on the other hand, for me to fight my way and find those papers and find good research papers that are coming out of India also was a revelation for me because these are not very easily available or accessible. So then to kind of find those papers and then make them accessible to a wider audience, sure, that's kind of fun. And yeah, I guess there are more tribes to be found. And I think India's geoscience communication has a way to go. And it would be fun to kind of find a tribe there. And I think Twitter in some ways has kind of given me that because there are, like, it's incredible to see the kind of audience that there is for this content right now. And I'm sure that will only increase. So,
Okay. Okay, that's great. So let's move on to a little bit about becoming or being a freelancer, right? So I can see that you're building quite a brand for yourself, and so how important do you think this is, and how can one go about working on it?
so I think as with everything else, it's not easy. I would initially always feel so money is a big issue a lot as a freelancer. And if there's anything we learn along the way, is that while we're happy to take risks and make those leaps, nothing is easy if the money starts pinching. And if there's a little bit of advice I can offer, is make sure that while you're honing your skills, because there's a long ways that we have to go when we're learning, if you can find something where there's a retainer, where there's some steady income, where maybe a position itself doesn't allow you to do everything, but the money is steady, I would suggest jump on board that for a bit while you hone your skills enough to break away completely and then be a freelancer. Because the question of money doesn't get easier. It's always going to be up and down. And the most important thing is for you to then be comfortable enough to say, hey, okay, now either this, I don't know, can't say, oh, rich family, they're going to take care of me, because that's not why half of us are working in the first place, right? But to say, okay, I've saved up enough, and maybe worst case scenario, nobody reaches out to me for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months. Can I kind of survive? Can I thrive, in fact, right? So I think once you kind of have that groundwork, and once you have learned on time that is borrowed, you're working at a steady, then I feel to break away as a freelancer, as a consultant, makes a lot more sense, because then you're tuned to the vagaries that come along with suddenly too much work and suddenly no work at all. Suddenly a lot of money, it's never a lot of money, or suddenly no money at all, right? So I think that balance is key. But in the long run, what's really gratifying, and I will say this now, no matter how difficult the money gets or clients get or whatever, it's that joy of constantly learning something new project, of being able to dictate your terms, of being able to have a niche that you have created that people are coming to you for, and that you're not having to hustle all the time. It takes a while, but I think it's really worth it, because ultimately that's what we all kind of want to do. Want to rely on our strengths and not always be working under somebody, for somebody, but alongside somebody. And I think that's the confidence that freelancing kind of gives you, because you're shoulder to shoulder with whoever you're working with. And then those interpersonal relationships, which are part of a full-time team that you work with, or are important more so when you're working as a freelancer, because you're shuffling clients all the time. Those skills are indispensable, and that's going to be there, and that's still going to help you along the way. So I think get on a retainer, get on something solid, build up your skills, and then take that leap. It just makes so much of a difference. And yeah, but in the end, it's very gratifying. It's difficult in parts, and it's gratifying in parts. I guess like all jobs are.
Okay. Thank you so much for putting it that way. All right. So then we'll quickly move on to the next section of our episode, where we're going to crunch in so many questions we have and try to understand and know more about you. So let's head on to the rapid fire round, and let's get started in 3, 2, 1. So the first question is, as a freelancer, if you had one of these for eternity, which one would you choose? A continuous flow of non-collaborative but high-ticket clientele, or an irregular flow of collaborative and very nice clientele?
Oh, definitely the former. There is so much learning. I mean, you have to fight your way through sometimes, but it's incredibly no collab. I think as a freelancer, what you tend to do is you isolate yourself. Sometimes you're missing out on the learning. Collaboration is the way to go. Sorry, it's rapid fire. Go on.
Yes. Do you feel lonely as being one of the very few communication consultants in geosciences and geology?
No, there's not enough time to. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be overrun very soon. I'm waiting for it.
Okay. What's the misconception about you as a science communications consultant you'd like to address?
Um, Shifting around a lot. It's often seen as something that isn't a good sign, because I don't know, maybe the older generation stuck around in a job for like ever, and I've done 10 different things in this past decade. But I think that has been the learning too. And that very learning has been both a challenge and has been a boon. Interdisciplinary is the way to go. And as a science communicator, that is a skill to be celebrated. So my CV might look like there are a million things on it, but trust me, I've learned through every single one of them, and that's building all the time.
Awesome. So, what were few transferable skills or key learnings that you've picked up through working at organizations that have sort of helped you become a better freelancer?
Um, Interactions, I guess. Interpersonal relationships are priceless, and there is no taking away from that. At every possible interval, you cannot stagnate as either a consultant or you've never arrived of sorts. And the only way that's kind of driven through and your learning kind of continues is by interacting with people all the time. You broaden your ideas, your mindset, and learn.
Okay. One piece of advice you'd like to give a fellow freelancer.
Run. No. Um, it's worth it. Stick with it. It's worth it.
Okay, so you
And
have
then
to.
run.
Sorry.
And then run.
Okay, some true or false questions. So you have to have a background in science to communicate it. True or false?
No.
Okay.
False.
Okay. There are a few geoscience communicators because it's too mundane to be communicated. True or false?
False. No.
False.
We've just not done a good job so far, clearly. We'll get there.
Okay. If you can point out to one event or person that has hugely impacted your career trajectory as a science communicator, what or who would that be?
I think my master's professor, the other ma'am, the one who painted landscapes lurid, she's influenced my journey as just everything, not just in geoscience, as a communicator, by being able to personify things you don't otherwise expect to be personified. It's always the way I kind of look at all content. Everything's alive.
Okay. If there is any, what's one thing you would like to change in your career?
I guess the inconsistency, the fact that projects that come through in these buckets are usually very few and far in between in a way, and that hustle is constant. I think it would be nice to kind of have something that's a little more long term, but that's a foundation for us to kind of set to present to people exactly how essential communication is and to be able to fill that void.
Okay. So this one last question. So what was something you had to learn to become a SciCommer? Once something very specific.
Everything. I had to learn everything. Um, Communication is also a constantly iterative process. If you're not listening to your audience, you're not learning. So just like with the science, communication was also about listening and learning. So I think just that.
Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you so much for participating in this quick rapid fire. And we move on to the next section now. And I'll let Shweta take you through and discuss a little bit about your favorite project. Go on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, both of you. I had a wonderful time. I learned so much. When you spoke about having diverse set of experiences and not to stagnate is something that I really, really think is valuable for me.
Great.
And science communication gets you through, makes you learn so many things in diverse ways. And, anyways, I won't take so much time. Let's get on with the thought process segment where we discuss our guests' favorite or passionate project. And this time we are going to discuss about Geosophy, which is Devayani's newsletter, where she talks about landscape, history, folklore, myth, cartography, and so much more. So I think you should probably take a little time to talk a little bit about how you came up with the project, and then we can go about asking specific questions. Go ahead.
Great. So I know a lot of people think social media is a waste of time, and by and large, maybe it is, and all of us are at it, right? Wasting our time. And at some point in time, I used to post a lot of content to do with insects and birds, because those are largely my interest. A lot of travel, because that's where things are. And on one occasion, I put up a tweet that was talking about a geological feature that I was fascinated by. And the tweets went kind of viral. I was shocked. Like 500 plus, you get what, 5 hits on your tweets, if at all. But 500, and it just, like, it went berserk. I woke up one day and there was this thing, and I'm like, people are interested in this kind of content? Like, really? I'm talking about, I think it started out with Hampi, right? And anybody who's been to Hampi knows that that's such a distinct landscape. And while the temples are really fascinating, you can't help but notice those rocks just lying around in heaps all around. So what is that all about? So I think it kind of started off there, and then I did like another thread on another feature that you can see practically all over South India, and then there are certain clusters around in North India called a dike formation. And that also kind of had a good amount of interaction. So I think I was just a little struck at how ready the audiences were kind of to hear these things. What's more, there were certain features in the landscapes that people had noticed themselves. They just didn't know what was going on. Everyone's noticed Humpy, for instance, but how was that formed? Why are these boulders just kept around like that in piles, for instance? And I felt that that's that connect you need to make, not talking about wild features that maybe nobody's ever going to see, or talking about something subsurface that cares. Groundwater, for instance, while it's very relevant to us, it's so difficult to kind of translate that as a concept. So while I was kind of putting this out, randomly I put up a poll and I said, if as a more regular feature, I were to run some content, what could that kind of be? And when I ran a poll, there was a surprising number of takers for, yeah, sure, we'd be keen on like a newsletter. So I think it kind of started from there. And I think before the first newsletter, as you can see this scroll, I've done 4 issues so far of Geosophy. The name also kind of comes from the fact that, tongue-in-cheek joke was that my Twitter handle is Geosophist. And sophist actually means somebody who's in search of knowledge. I wasn't drunk when I created it, but it does kind of sound a little there. But Geosophy then just seemed like a logical statement, because Geosophy is also that sense of wonder about the landscapes. It's about the knowledge that is there behind what you kind of see. So that was the concept. And then I rolled out the newsletter just this June, in fact. It's been 4 months. There have been 4 issues. And as a pet project, it's just going to talk about the topics I find fascinating. So Kumao, for one, I'd visited, I think the pandemic's given us a time break, maybe 2-3 years ago, exactly in June, a few centuries ago, before the pandemic, that is. So it just seemed like a natural thing, because Kumao just had so many incredible features that I had kind of noticed, along with a lot of the birds and things that I'd looked at. So it just seemed like that. And right now, at least, the ideas are just what I want to kind of flow with every month. And since then, I've kind of followed it up with issues, because I traveled to Goa at some point in time, and I discovered these archaeological finds of the stories etched in stone. In a way, I'm talking about these petroglyph structures, which I saw on a riverbed carved in, and they've been dated back 20, 30,000 years. All of us have traveled to Goa by and large. We go to the beaches and people are asking where, I don't know, what Tito's or something is. And, I mean, we're all eating like crazy in Goa, but nobody goes for Goa's archaeology. Nobody goes for Goa's geology. So what I wanted to kind of do was to highlight destinations that maybe we're familiar with, but showcase something different. So Geosophy is going to be a mix of making things relevant, something you may have already kind of seen, or then bringing to your attention something wildly different. The Humpy issue was largely looking at Humpy, such a fun kind of spot, but there's a bit of mythology behind it. There is incredible landscape, and what is the evolution of that landscape? And the last issue that I just done last month was on cartography, which map making as a subject is endlessly fascinating to me. And to think that we have this history and a bit of a gap in that history of making maps. Why were they created? What purpose are they serving? That just seemed really fascinating to me. So that's what I'll be kind of doing into the future as well. Whatever inspires me, whatever kind of seems topical at the time. And next up, my inspiration is Ladakh. So again, one of those destinations that is either on everyone's checklist or people kind of already been there. And one of those landscapes that you cannot forget. And the geology is at the heart of all of it. So that's
looking forward to that one. Yeah. Okay. So I think for most of us, at least for me, I was learning about these for the first time, like when I looked at, when you talked about Goa and its rock, and when you talked about Hampi. So I think that's why it is very relevant for you to just, contextualize um, uh, geography and so on. So maybe could you spend a little bit about how do you curate all of this information, and how long does it take, how much time do you spend, and so on?
So, as I said, the learning is constantly there, even at my end. This is not always off the top of my head, and I know everything, and that's it. I'm able to convey all of this. Um, there are a lot of new concepts that I kind of stumble upon. So it's something that maybe I've read or am reading, and that kind of seems fascinating to me, that I feel I would like to convey. Again, as I said, sometimes it's because I've traveled to a place, or I would want to travel again to Ladakh. That kind of inspires what it is that I'm doing. And I think that relevance is only because geography is all around us, and the very fact that we're kind of disconnected from it, or we think that it was boring because we had to point out where sugarcane is on the map of India, for instance, has just decontextualized what geography is and its meaning to us in our everyday life. And the fact that people, to me, choose a whole bunch of other subjects to specialize in, but disconnect from geography because they don't know what it can really do, was, I think, like a great tragedy. So I think, in a way, the newsletter is trying to forward that, and just give people a real stake in what they see around them and kind of learn. So the ideas come from what I think I'm learning along the way, and by how I can rope somebody else into that conversation as well. And then we can learn together, because sometimes I've had some really fascinating letters that came through after like the first few issues, where people have sent me photos of rocks, for instance. Said, oh, we've kind of seen this. Or after those Twitter threads, I put up those things about dikes, by the way, are these volcanic features. They look like strips in rocks, very, very distinct. And so many people sent me photos saying, oh, by the way, I've seen this in Andhra Pradesh. I've seen this in like Telangana. I've seen this in like other places. So it's about that. It's about making that connect and saying, hey, you've seen this too. All I'm kind of telling you is what this is. And then we can kind of take that learning forward. And sometimes, like with all science, geosciences does not have all the answers. We don't know definitively whether something is such or such. So what I would also kind of like to do is to show that gray area and say, we think that this is a possibility. Something like the Saraswati River disappearing, right? So hotly contested, and there's a religious side to it, and a political side to it, and a geological side to it. Then what are the possible theories that geology offers? And then still kind of draw that fine balance without treading on religious sentiments, but still kind of saying, hey, maybe this could explain it. So I think it's just that. It's a mix. What's in it for you? What's in it for me? What's in it for us?
Right. Okay, so I think in those moments when you get these pictures or get these newsletters, do you feel like, this is why I'm doing this? Is that how it is?
It helps. It helps.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely. I think it's nice. As I said, as a communicator, I constantly feel blindsided if my audience is not responding to me or able to have a two-way conversation. So yes, the letters kind of give me a sense that, hey, there's somebody else out there in the ether, and the newsletters are not just going out into nowhere. But it also gives me a sense that some bit of that enthusiasm is being shared, and that's so much fun. So the letter I got was from a young mother in Dehradun, mother who had kids, and the kids had found some exciting rocks around in Dehradun, and she sent me photos of it. And it just so happened they weren't rocks; they were pieces of glass that had gotten rounded up over time. So she's like, "Oh, so where can we kind of find these rocks, and what is the whole thing?" And I said, "No, go looking around for like a historic glass factory instead." And she was immediately, she's like, "Yeah, actually, there's a glass factory somewhere there, and I think we'll kind of go look for it." What's going to be fun is I'm hoping to travel to Dehradun sometime soon, and I have my local guides all set already.
That's very nice. Yeah. Okay, so maybe could you also talk about more broader sort of general reception of the newsletter? Like how have people responded?
So I was pleasantly surprised with, I think there were over 70 people who registered before the first newsletter even went out because I'd created a bit of a buzz on it for it on Twitter. But right now, 4 issues later, I'm on to almost 300 subscribers, and I'm pretty sure this crowd will plateau out at some point. But apart from that, I think the reception is not only in terms of well, the letters that I get, which are very sweet, or sometimes the kudos that happen kind of on Twitter. But I'm hoping at some point in time that it sparks off other areas of interest and inquiry for people. So I do kind of know that a couple of the Twitter threads I've done, for instance, has kind of inspired people to travel to a couple of those locations and kind of see that place for themselves. And even if this kind of word doesn't kind of get back to me or whatever, it's very exciting to kind of see that maybe this will just spark people's interest in other areas on their own. So I think reception wise, I'm happy with where it is. I'm pretty sure that with a little bit more buzz, I'm sure there'll be more crowd that's interested in something like that. But for now, I think I'd rather have a small audience that's really committed and interested than have a whole bunch of people who may not be able to make the time to read that kind of long form content on a monthly basis on geosciences. So it's just a way to distill certain things because I don't think we come across geo content anywhere else really in our everyday lives. Newspapers don't have it. On daily news feeds, definitely don't. So it's few and far in between. So that's all. I kind of wanted to be a monthly fix.
Okay, that's great.
Okay. So maybe then could you also talk a little bit give some people advice as to how they could start their newsletter or what are the sort of logistics that's involved and so on?
So, logistics wise, I think first off, you need to figure out, I think a little bit of a calendar or a little bit of a think through kind of helps so that you're able to understand how much, how far you can go, how long you can keep at it. Deciding on a frequency and being able to roughly kind of stick to it is also really good practice for a newsletter. If it's very erratic, you will lose attention. If it's too often, I think people are going to kind of tune out. So striking that right balance. And again, it's something I'm learning along the way. How much content is too much content and how little is not worth it either. So I
It's a back and forth.
absolutely. So it's that evolution that I think is something that you need to think through hard and fast. Apart from that, the logistics of actually committing to a newsletter with tools like MailChimp that allow you up to 2,000 subscribers for free, which is a very great way to get started. And 2,000 is like up there. And after which the cost for it is pretty nominal. So it's still something you can kind of keep running. So I think time commitment, I started out and I'd been clocking how long I kind of take for a monthly feature. And just to kind of set it up, host it somewhere, do the research, do the background. I do some sketches from time to time in the newsletter as well. So I think it's
That's
roughly
great,
like
by the
time.
way.
Yeah, it's just fun. There are some diagrams I can't find out there, so then I think you're stuck with my diagrams. So I think like a 10 to 20 hour commitment per month is reasonable if you kind of want something this. But of course, I'm sure that will kind of change based on what kind of content you're churning out and whether your content has other avenues. But I think logistics wise, it's pretty simple. It's very encouraging. And as I said, a platform like MailChimp allows you to monitor a whole bunch of metrics: who's reading your newsletter, who's opened what links, what kind of content is being received in a particular way, where people are sharing your content. So it kind of makes things much easier. So figure out these three elements. What content are you going to run? How long do you really feel you can run it for? The frequency. Once you've kind of sorted that out, tools like this just make it very, very easy. And then you build up your database little by little.
Okay, so content, length, and frequency. Got it.
Frequency, yeah.
Awesome. So, so to top it off, could you then maybe talk a little bit about your favorite feature or what was your favorite part working on the newsletter so far?
It's just been 4 issues. I can't have peaked yet. There's a long ways to go. But a topic I'm personally fascinated by is mythology. I love stories. I think everybody does. But what I find endlessly fascinating is how many different stories there are for a particular location. And in the case of geomorphology, especially, it's incredible the kind of stories we've come up for to explain why a feature looks the way it does. I also like the fact that geomyths across the world sometimes echo the same stories, like Noah's flood, which I'd kind of featured in this newsletter. There's a reason why Noah's flood kind of features across civilizations. Like a Chinese whispers almost, right? People got the names wrong, people got, but details are still there. There's like this big flood, there's a boat, there are lots of animals, some such. So I kind of like those elements. And I think what I love kind of doing is weaving these two segments together because there's a science to it. Again, not to conflate the science and religion or myth, but just to say, hey, this is how we kind of get inspired over certain things. This is what's there in our collective imagination. And to be able to draw it, if I just started talking about a landscape to you, for instance, Hampi, and let's say you'd never been there, but instead, if I'm able to say Kishkinda, Ramayan, I'm already pulling at strings that you already know, stories you've already heard, and then all I'm telling you is that, hey, did you know Kishkinda is Hampi, for instance, and where that kind of name comes from, and why does that kind of happen? So I think it's that. It's kind of talking to the audience in their own language and just being able to find that thread of relevance and then drawing it out and saying, okay, forget the Ramayana now, here's the geology. So something like that. So I think mythology.
It's kind of
phenomenal.
like storytelling, right?
Always.
Okay. Anyways, it was super awesome talking with you about the newsletter, and I hope to see more of these issues. Anyways, and for people who haven't subscribed, please do. It's awesome. Okay.
Yeah.
With that, we end this thought process segment, and now we move on to Q&A. So before we ask some questions from the listeners, I usually ask our guests to talk about some resource recommendations that they would like to give. So for you, I would like to ask resource recommendations specific to geoscience communication and communication consulting.
Communications consultant. Okay, that will be trickier. So for geosciences, I would highly recommend, especially someone who's interested and might have a little bit of a background in science, because content can be a little technical sometimes, is the Rapid Uplift blog. I found it endlessly fascinating. In fact, I got onto it during my master's. We were learning some theory for formation of laterite plateaus, and I wrote to the author. And we started corresponding all the way back then. And now he's a friend and he's still my go-to guy for any doubts I have. So his blog is the longest standing geology blog in the country, I think 14 years or some such. And it's got a huge, like a range of content from different geographies. He also kind of touches upon evolution and other topics from time to time. So that's really great. Do I drop a link in the chat window or? Sorry,
Yes,
that.
You can drop it here.
Yeah, I'll just do that. So. Right. So that's one thing. Another place, as well, self-promo, but there's a whole bunch of scientists who are involved. The Geobites blog is also really fascinating because it's a snippet of information from recent papers and coverage from across the world that we are distilling as a community and kind of trying to put it out there. What's really great is a lot of people access non-open access papers. So these are papers that most likely people cannot get at themselves. And the way that they've been simplified and summarized just makes it like a quick bite-sized thing that you can get onto and then move on. In terms of, well, as a communications consultant, I think that's going to be a little more difficult because I think science communication can be a whole range of different things. The Open Notebook is an excellent example if you're keen on journalism and science communication and marrying the two, because they are not talking about science topics per se. They're talking about the craft of communication itself. So that is like my go-to place for anytime I kind of stumble. Let me just find that link as well. So the Open Notebook has a huge range of tools that you can kind of use, as in how do you conduct interviews, how do you dig into a story, how do you find sources, how do you protect sources, a whole range of these kind of things, which, by the way, are not only relevant to journalists, but are very key to the craft of communication and then science communication specifically. Great. So I think Open Notebook's a go-to source. And in recent things, there has been some really incredible work that is happening from this Lifeology app, where they've designed a whole bunch of these tools that you can kind of do at your own pace. They have these little guides in place, and it's a lovely place where science, art, which if I had the talent, I would totally kind of try to step into, and communication kind of meet. And I think there's no better platform. Nobody wants to read content. No, I shouldn't be saying that. But as in content, still there's so many different ways in which to distill content. And I think art is definitely a way that people are more receptive to. So this platform kind of marries the two tools beautifully. So these are my go-to resources among a few others.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you so much for those, and also for the links. Maybe we can probably pick on your unconventional path, right? So how has not having a background in science, I don't know if I can say that, but can it help you in your communication endeavors?
I think Carl Sagan had said it, though I'm probably murdering the quote. I don't have a good head for quotes. About how, not having learned it or known it for himself, he had to take that much more effort to learn it and distill it for a broader audience. And I think, in a way, with science, that has been the thing. I had to first set that foundation for myself and say, hey, what is this new concept? What are we exactly kind of saying here? And that's why I feel it was interesting to be able to step between a broad audience and then the scientists who might have been and are actually working on very, very interesting things, and then kind of bridge those gaps. So I think I wouldn't say I don't have a background in science at all, because sure, after 10th, I didn't do science for a while. And then there's a conflict about whether psychology, sociology, political science is even a science, which I think they are. I think eventually science is a philosophy within yourself. It's not about a field. It's not about what you choose. It's about how you go about seeking information, vetting that information, and then being able to understand and distill it for yourself. So in some ways, I feel we're all scientists, no matter what our background is. And I really feel that's at the heart of everything. What is your purpose? And with communication, it's always that. It's not about you, and it's not about what you want to say, though there might be a lot. It's about what somebody else might want to hear. And it's about tailoring that content so that you're speaking the right things in the right places in the right way. And I think that's the key. So I think it's largely communication, and then a background in science is great to have, but if not, you kind of learn a lot along the way as well, and that's fun.
Okay, that's great. Then maybe my last question for you would be, could you talk about any of your memorable encounters, maybe when you visited a place and people didn't know any place, like it happened with Goa, or something like that we could probably talk a little before we conclude?
I think there's lots of different places. Great. Northeast India. I think one of the most distinct features about Northeast India are just these incredible water bodies that you have. I'm talking largely about Meghalaya. I've traveled a little around. But when you go trekking in Meghalaya, for instance, you see these beautiful turquoise blue lakes and rivers. And it's water that's unnaturally blue. Never seen such clean water one. You've never seen such blue water. And I was traveling alone at the time, and then I just kind of hooked up with a whole bunch of random trekkers, and we were kind of exploring these trails together. And what kind of makes it so fascinating? Because, like with everything with landscapes, right, there are those jaw dropping moments where you come upon that thing and everyone's like, "Oh, look at this, it's so fascinating." So I think these are really feel good kind of moments where you can jump in as a science communicator and say, hey, by the way, I know why it's blue like this, you know. It's like that thing where people say, oh, you know why the rain smells so good, of petrichor, for instance, and we all realized, oh, it's about bacteria. So with this, it's because of these limestones that are there across that landscape through which these rivers have carved their way through millennia. And it's that limestone that gives it that very distinct. So it's about moments like this where you're just, okay, fine, waiting on the edge. Okay, I'm perched at the edge, waiting to jump in and say, hey, did you know, kind of a moment. But it's, I think just traveling and trekking is always like a great input for that. So I think I had these people who are from Croatia and Slovakia and Czech Republic. And it was lots of fun because then they were able to give me counter points in their own countries and say, yeah, actually, now that you kind of mention it, we have these rivers here, 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 and kind of fits like a jigsaw. It's great.
Wow, that's so nice, and it's such pure joy to see you describe all of this and the kind of excitement you have. It's always a treat to be having a
Should have
conversation.
seen me on the edge of that river.
I can totally imagine.
Imagine,
I
yeah.
can't say that, but I can at least estimate the expanse of, like, I don't know, the excitement that you might have had, right? So I'm so glad you could sort of share that with us. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your experiences, and also giving us a little tidbits on how you paved through, and then how things can help freelancers and people interested in geosciences communicate science, right? So thank you so much for joining us, and
So
also
much for having me. It was really fun. You promised me a fun session and totally worth Saturday evening. Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
okay,
So
I'm so glad you feel that way. And also, thank you so much for all the audience who've joined us today. And if you've missed parts of it, don't worry, because the entire session and all the other previous episodes will be available to you all on our YouTube channel. And we'll meet you next alternate Saturday at 6 p.m. again, and with another interesting guest with an interesting course of career paths, right? So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Shweta, for co-hosting the show. Yes, and ciao, bye bye. Thank you.
Bye bye.
okay.